Hello everyone. Welcome to the cusp of my favorite season, autumn. Autumn has cometh. That's right, which means the humidity goes down in the northeast, and it also means that my pits are going to be drier than they've been in 2 months, which is something to celebrate in my opinion. So, in order to celebrate the coming of autumn, I thought it might be fun to do an autumn-inspired painting featuring one of my favorite things in the whole world, a bird of the corvid family, a crow, because whose favorite bird isn't one that feeds on the carrion of other animals? So let's do this thing. Okay, so I am working on a 16 by 20 inch canvas that I have misted with water before starting in with acrylic color. My first color is a warm white to represent the point that's farthest away, which is the sky. And I will list all the colors for each layer of this painting in the description. I'm working from the points farthest away for the first layer because that is a layering process that I use, and I'm going in with a little bit of burnt umber and adding that and a cadmium orange and some yellows to get that far away foliage effect. So the farthest foliage will be the blurriest, and more details will be added as we get closer to the foreground. So this is a really kind of important part of this process, is working from back to front. And I'm using a squeegee to really kind of get that blurry effect while the paint is still wet. And then I will start to add in some of my other colors. But I am leaving the center of the canvas pretty light in color, as my focal point is dark in color and will be placed somewhere in the middle of the canvas. I wasn't sure at this point if I was going to paint a path through the woods or some implication of water, so I just left it open to see where the background took me. Working really loose in the beginning really helps me to see the shapes and the colors that I can embellish in order to create features like trees and foliage and leaves and twigs and all of the rest of it. So this color is Payne's Gray, and I'm using a Payne's Gray instead of a black because blue, which Payne's Gray is more of a bluish color, really complements orange. Blue is the opposite on the color wheel, and so it actually kind of makes the orange stand out more, and it gives that bluish shadowy effect, which I really like. So I'm going back and forth with this fine mist sprayer, and that is a fluffy makeup brush. I find them to be really effective for blenders, and they don't shed as much as the actual blending brushes, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, you can get them at your local pharmacy, and they work really well for the blending, and you can get a bunch of them in one package for a relatively cheap price. So they work really well for this kind of blending process. And then I do want to have some drips kind of working into this abstract background, so I used the spray bottle and kind of add some drips, and I'm using a transparent burnt sienna. So there are 2 different kinds of burnt sienna that I like to use, and Liquitex makes this amazing transparent burnt sienna. So it's really easy to just go over color, deep in color, and make it almost like if you go over a yellow, it'll make this really beautiful kind of orangey color that has more of a russet tone to it, which I think is perfect for fall. So I did that, going over the cadmium yellow hue with the transparent burnt sienna. And then, because, you know, I'm impatient, I use a blow dryer to dry that first layer of paint. And yeah, it works. It works really well. So getting some of these darker shadows in, I'm using the Payne's Gray once again, and just kind of like, oh, maybe that tree will go there. I'm not really sure. And I used a neutral gray by Golden. I'm using only regular acrylics at this point, but I will be going into some of the Golden Open acrylics in order to blur that background out even further. And having some of these light points going in with some of the neutral gray, because the neutral gray against any yellow or orange actually gives this kind of purpley effect, which is really neat just because of the color contrast. So a neutral gray is always a good color to have in your palette in general, especially if you're using bright colors. It's a lot easier to get away with using bright colors if you use some neutral grays. So now we're coming closer into the foreground and we're going to put some trees in. So I'm using a black to put the trees that are coming in closest, and I'm using the Burnt Umber by Golden Open Acrylics in order to do the trees that are farther away because it's more transparent. I also used this Burnt Umber in order to deepen the color and the shadows around the trees because it's beautiful transparent color and you can kind of make the shadows, and you can also use it to make the shadows of the foliage, which I'm going to paint a brighter color on top of, but you'll be able to see some of that deeper color underneath the foliage. And I'm just using the corner of the flat brush and just kind of making some shapes that are going to give the implication of some blurrier leaves that are a little bit farther away from the leaves that will be put on top of that color. So it's a really good way of kind of just working still from back to front, but with the objects that are coming closer to you. Is you still want to keep that in mind, that even the objects that are coming closer to you, you want to take each object and kind of paint it from the farthest point away towards you. And this is a really good way of doing it, is by putting your darker colors and then your brighter or your highlights on top. And that's what I did with the trees. I painted those trees in with black, and then I put the highlights, which I'm using the Payne's gray mixed with a little bit of white for the highlights on the trees where the light hits the tree, and that kind of creates the same color palette. So you're using the same color palette, you're just kind of embellishing certain areas with the same colors. And I'm going to be using the Payne's gray again with the crow as the highlights on the crow, because the crow is black, but the highlights have almost a bluish color to them. And I think that will create a nice contrast with all of the orange and kind of this russet foliage that's in the background. Painting the crow is actually the easiest part of the painting because I'm only using 3 colors: black, Payne's gray, and white. And you just kind of have to go through and find out where the darkest parts of the crow are, and you can play around with it. And it's like, what parts are going to be in complete shadow? Where is there light going to be reflecting off the wings? And you don't want the whole entire thing to just be black against the sky behind it. You do want to have a little bit of definition. So using that Payne's gray is going to give kind of the definition of the crow, and I'm just using brush strokes. I'm not really making anything super detailed because all of the brush strokes are going to kind of create the illusion of detail, except when it comes to the bird feet, which if anyone has watched any of my videos where I paint birds, bird feet are not my favorite thing in the world to paint, so I do leave them usually to the last thing that I do. But the crow has to have something to perch on, and because the crow is closest, you're going to have this branch be kind of larger than everything else as well. So having kind of this combination of the black and the transparent burnt sienna in there just to give a little bit of depth to the tree branch, and then putting in some more colorful to as it goes off into that darker shadowy area there. So this is where I started to paint the feet, and then I was like, okay, now I gotta move on to something else, and I'll paint some leaves because bird feet really do, they get me every time. I don't know what it is about them. They're just annoying. So I wanted to have some leaves that were a little closer, and just to have a little bit of color to break up that really dark area in the corner. And I thought, I'll put in some fall leaves here, and I'll put in a little bit of like a vine or something. And it's just the same thing with just putting in some brush strokes to give the impression that there are leaves some there. There are leaves right there. And speaking is not always my strong point. And then putting some other just bursts of color in certain areas to break up kind of the gray area where it looks really, really misty. I did like how the misty kind of Payne's gray was coming out. I thought that looked really cool in contrast to the really bright colors on the other side. And I'm doing the same thing with this cadmium orange. And this is a regular acrylic. This isn't golden open acrylic. So I'm using a combination of these two acrylic paints within this and just giving some cadmium orange, some cadmium yellow, mixing that a little bit in with the orange, and then also using cadmium red light in order to get some of those really vibrant red colors in there. But and having some leaves kind of falling in the center, and still just using the corner of the brush for that. And then I thought, oh, well, if that is water, I want to have a little bit of a reflection of the tree above it. So just pulling that color down a little bit, and then I'm going to go across it horizontally to kind of give this impression of there being a body of water and having this kind of misty area where the body of water is. And like I said before, I'm putting those brighter colors on top of that burnt umber base that I put there, and just putting in some of the final brighter colors and some of the final details in there, and bringing a little bit of that cadmium red into the mix. And this painting is just about done. Okay, so this painting took me about 3 hours to complete from start to finish, and I'm very happy with it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and happy autumn, everyone. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.